Hi, everybody. This is Dee Reinhardt with Illinois WorkNet. Today we're talking during Workforce Development Week about interview tips in 30 minutes. And this session is on healthcare interviews. Today I would like to welcome Urvita Patel from Presence Health. She is a recruiter for the healthcare system and Presence Health Hospital. So I'd like to welcome Urvita to the webinar today.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Let's get started. We've got two questions on the screen right here, and they're biggies. Healthcare is by nature a fit for caregivers. Caregivers, obviously, if someone is a nurse or a radiography tech, healthcare is their choice. But what sort of positions would someone apply for that might be offered in a different industry?
There's several positions. I mean, like you said, there could be clinical positions and support positions that healthcare may employ. I mean, we hire from environmental services to imaging services, all the way up to, physicians. So healthcare is a very broad spectrum, if you will.
So how does somebody answer the two questions you've got up on the screen?
So the first thing that I always recommend is doing the research. It's very easy to click apply online and, kind of go through the motions of it. But once you get the interview, you've kind of passed step one, which is the application. What we want to know as recruiters and hiring managers is why do you want to work for our organization versus, even our competitors? What kind of drives you? What's your story, and how are you connected to us? So it's really important that you do your research ahead of time. Check the website. That's a great resource to get to know, where the mission, vision, values lie with that organization and what their driving forces are. You also want to be mindful of telling your story. I mean, people want to know, why did you choose healthcare? Why do you want to be a nurse? Why did you choose to be an ultrasound tech? So those are the types of positions that, or questions rather, we want answered, ahead of time. And they do, they require a lot of thought when you answer them, because they're not going to be able to be very generic because it's coming from you.
Right. So we talked about some support workers. How does that interviewee who's an administrative assistant or a kitchen staff of some sort let that interviewer know that healthcare is a good fit for them?
Well, they may have previous experience, whether it was as a patient or, being in the facility or a like facility that they may have a good experience from. That may be a good way to share it, or maybe that's how they came across it. Maybe they were a referral of someone else who's worked here and has had an equal experience.
All right, good. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about a couple of these points on the screen there.
Yes, be prepared. We cannot stress how important it is to be prepared. It's the small things that really count, which I will mention again and again. The soft skills or the intangibles, and a lot of those come from being prepared. Normally, as a recruiter, when I set up an interview during or after a phone screen, I will ask you to bring certain documents. Of course, with clinical type positions, we need to verify licensures and certifications and even education sometimes. So be sure to have that readily available. If someone asks you to bring something, please make sure that you're bringing it. It shows that you are prepared for the interview. Carrying extra copies of your resume. Although we may set up a time for you to meet with one hiring manager, it's possible that you may meet with several hiring managers that day, depending on who's available. So you never want to run out of copies of your resume when it's such a simple thing to bring in. Doing a dry run, this is huge. We all know hospitals, medical centers, these types of facilities have very large grounds with different types of buildings. They may be marked, they may be unmarked. So I always encourage candidates to come in maybe a day beforehand, and you don't necessarily have to go to the office, but you want to know the general area where you're going and how long it's going to take for you to get there, which leads me into my next point of punctuality. It's essential. I can't stress enough, be 10 to 15 minutes early. I wouldn't say anything more than that. Sometimes the Human Resources Department will ask that you fill out some paperwork while you're waiting, so we want to make sure that you keep enough time scheduled before your actual interview to fill out those documents. Now, we've had people show up, an hour early, and although it's good to be early, you don't want to be too early, especially if there are various interviews set up around the same time. It can be a little awkward for you to see who's going in and out, and vice versa. So, we definitely encourage you to be early, but not too early. And then preparing a list of questions in advance. That's also very important. Know what's important to you ahead of time, I would say. Are benefits important? What about the work environment? You want to make sure that you are prepared with at least 2 or 3 questions with what's important to you working at that hospital or that medical center in advance.
So obviously, if the person did their research, they'll have some questions based on what they found. But what are a couple of other good questions that somebody can ask? And what shouldn't they ask?
Oh, that's great. What they should ask is, with technology these days, you want to know what your hospital is investing their money in. Is there new equipment in the surgery area? What is the turnover rate? How many patients per nurse are there typically? What can we expect? The types of questions that we don't necessarily encourage but want you to be prepared for, salary is one, of course. For example, we're a non-for-profit organization, so our salary measures are based upon the number of years of experience that you have. So you may not want to directly ask, well, what's the pay rate for this position? It could be a turnoff sometimes. Other questions maybe not to ask are personal questions. Believe it or not, I've been asked, are you married? Do you have kids? I mean, that's kind of irrelevant towards what the interview is geared towards, which is the position and if you're a good fit for that position.
That's great. I want to pull out a poll question right now, and let's ask the audience, what is it that they do before an interview? And I know we've got some repeat people in our audience today, so some of them have an advantage of knowing what they should be answering here.
Well, the numbers are looking good so far.
Yeah, they are. All right, we're going to go back to our presentation. I'm going to hide this poll question, and let's move on to the next slide.
Yes, first impressions go a long way. And you can kind of see that in this presentation. It's building towards the end. You're going to research, you're going to be prepared, and then you want to present yourself appropriately because these first impressions go a long way and they stay with interviewers, again, the hiring manager or the recruiter. First and foremost, especially in a clinical setting, it's okay to wear scrubs when you're at work. It's a part of the job. However, when you're coming in for an interview and you're meeting with HR or the hiring manager who may be a manager or a director or even a vice president, you don't want to show up in scrubs and gym shoes. You want to show up looking your best. You want to dress to impress, I always say. Don't wear the shorts or the skirts or the short skirts. You want to look professional. Again, no heavy makeup, overly scented colognes or perfumes. These are things that people remember you by, and it's not usually in a positive way. Earrings and tattoos, it's great if you have them. Even working for a Catholic organization, it's okay that you have them, but but cover them up. We want you to be professional during the interview and, of course, when you're working. So if you have them, fine, but cover them up. Handshakes and eye contact are key. This is one of my favorites because it does take a lot of practice to perfect. Dee, I'm sure you can agree. Being a professional, you want to make sure your handshake isn't too soft, and you also don't want to hurt the interviewer's hand, so it's kind of finding that median. And then the eye contact, it's something that every interviewer looks for. Are you able to look me in the eye? If you're not able to look me in the eye, how are you going to be treating our patients? We want to make sure that you're comfortable in your own skin, and a good projection of that is sufficient eye contact. Maintaining good posture. I can't stress this enough. Posture can relate so many different things, including how it helps you project your attitude. If you're slouching, you can seem disengaged, you can seem bored. Having good posture lets the interviewer know that you are interested in what they have to say, you're interested in the organization or the position, and it doesn't come across as kind of distracting or even disrespectful sometimes if you're not, if you're kind of slouching in your chair or you have one arm up and, one foot over there. It doesn't always come across in a positive way. And then lastly, a lot of times my interviewees don't realize that they are being distracting. So we want to make sure that we are refraining from distracting types of behavior. For example, tapping your pencil on the desk very often, or itching your eye, or playing with your hair. All of that, even though it may be unconscious, could be very distracting for the interviewer. And again, you don't want to be remembered by the behaviors that you are associated with in that category. You want to be remembered for the answers that you give and that you're a qualified candidate. So absolutely, first impressions go a long way.
Exactly. Let's pull out this next poll question and see what everybody does during an interview. We should have pulled this out before you did this slide.
I gave away all the answers.
But it's good.
Yes, it's very good. And I know the don't fidget always gets to people. Again, we want to make sure that we are either having our hands on our tables, your hands crossed, or your arms by your side. Just simple things like that can help prevent that fidgeting.
I know one person has a nervous knee, and it bounces constantly. So sometimes I just reach over and put my hand on that knee to get it. You do that when you're the only one in the interview. That's kind of a tough call for somebody, which might bring us to our next slide. Interviews can be nerve-wracking. What are some things that the interviewer might do to help the interviewee? And then, what are some things that the interviewee can do to help themselves relax?
Oh, sure. Well, as a recruiter, I try not to be too intimidating. I always kind of set the table. So I want my interviewees to know what they're expecting, what to get out of this interview, and I remind them that I'm here to just, get to know them and get to know what their story is. Sometimes that alone helps ease the nervousness because I'm not here to, interrogate you. I want to know who you are and what you can bring to our company. So sometimes the expectations and knowing what's going to come forward helps the interviewees kind of manage their nervousness. Now, what interviewees can do to kind of help ease themselves and not be so nervous, the first point I have is be friendly, and it kind of goes with that third point of being yourself. You never know who you're talking to in the halls, whether it's a housekeeper or if it's, you may be walking past the VP, and you may not know who they are. You want to make sure you're saying hello and smiling. If you're not into the, small talk, just smile. It's a little bit that goes a long way, and all of this kind of helps ease that tension, and it makes you feel comfortable when you get a smile back from that other party. You want to make sure you're being honest along the way. So if you're sitting in an interview with me and I'm asking you about employment gaps, for example, you want to make sure that you are being genuine. You may not, want to go on tangents. I don't recommend that you badmouth the employer, but you want to be honest and find a positive. Was there a certain project that you worked on that you're very proud of, and although it didn't work out at that organization, you're confident in bringing it to this organization. So that kind of all just goes hand in hand with each. You can't expect every question, but if you sit with a friend or even in front of the mirror and just practice your smiling or practice your greetings and saying hello, it always helps.
Urbita, we just had a webinar earlier today, and we're going to post that recording very shortly, about an interview practice tool that we have on Illinois WorkNet. So if anybody is interested in using that tool, all you have to do is go to illinoisworknet.com and go to the Prepare section, and you'll find that resume building tool that has that interview practice section. Now, Nick has asked us a couple of questions. How can you tell if someone is winging a response to an interview question?
Well, oftentimes the responses we're looking for are not, yes or no answers. They are behavioral-based questions. So we want to know several parts to the situation that you may not be able to wing. What happened, what was the disagreement, what was the outcome. People tend to start stuttering or looking away or start fidgeting more often if they are winging winging an answer. People can tell, quite frankly, whether you're in HR or not, if someone is lying and being, dishonest. We're really looking for that honesty factor, even if it's not what we want to hear.
Yeah. Let's talk about this situation that Nick also typed. What if someone dressed professionally, they put on their suit, and they happen to slip and put on brown socks with black pants, or maybe they've lost some weight and their suit coat is just a little bit too big, or they borrowed one from somebody. Or maybe they're just colorblind and didn't realize that they put on the wrong color of something. Now, what happens what does the interviewer think about things like that?
It's actually a good question. Me personally, I don't use that against them. Everyone has their own style, of course, and everyone has their own wardrobe and and what they feel comfortable in. So obviously, if you're showing up in a suit but it's with the wrong sock color, that's not really something that's going to deem you as less qualified than the next candidate. But if you show up in jeans versus that big suit, it may deem you as unprofessional. So, no, we don't really consider such small aspects of your fashion.
Yeah. That's, we always say it's always easy to ask somebody, is this an appropriate outfit to wear? And always get a couple of interview outfits together so that if you get called at the last minute to show up for an interview, you've got that outfit ready to go.
Right. And I've had, some of my female friends say, is this appropriate? And if you have to question a few times if your skirt is too short or if, if your shirt is not appropriate, I mean, I would just say it's better to err on the side of caution and not wear it if you have to question it.
Yes, that's true. Very true. So let's take a look at our next slide. Um, we just talked about the workNet tool having some great um, practice tools available, and you can watch that recorded session that Chelsea's going to put in the chat pod for me in a moment. And all you have to do is have an Illinois WorkNet account, and you can access the tool on your own. So what is a good question that somebody can ask to clarify the next steps? And I know that's at the end of your slide, so when you get there, let's have an example of that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, let's start here at the beginning. Answer questions concisely, meaning answer them in its entirety. You don't want to leave the interviewer hanging. As I mentioned previously, the type of method we use is behavioral interviewing, as do many organizations. We want to know what the situation was. How did you respond? What was the result? Listen for those key types of questions. Sometimes if you bring a pen and paper with you, you can kind of write them down so you can refer to them so that you are answering all of the questions properly. And it's okay to take some time to think about those answers. You don't want to just jump the gun and say, this is what you're spitting out, and later in the car you may be like, oh my gosh, I forgot to answer this part of the question. It's just important that you listen to the interviewer cues and the questions that they're looking to be answered. And again, sometimes writing them down along the way. Obviously in shorthand helps, but silences and pauses are okay. I even encourage them. You want to make sure that you are taking time, again, to just think about the best answer that you can give. Silences are sometimes awkward, of course, but as interviewers, we understand that you may be nervous, or you may have several examples to choose from, or you may not have as many, so you need to think through that process. Asking questions to engage in conversation and demonstrate active listening. So if, for example, if someone is asking you about your skill set, you want to make sure that you are telling them how you've learned things. Bring up examples from previous work histories, or a time when XYZ happened to you and this is how you obtain that skill. Monitoring your communication skills, refraining from fillers. Of course, we all use them, that's for sure, like, and, so those are the types of things that may be distracting if you're using them excessively during the interviews, to kind of sit through those pauses. Be comfortable with yourself. Again, going back to that initial slide, that'll help prevent putting in those fillers.
Provita, we've got a question from the audience, and it kind of falls into this area. Should you repeat the question back to the interviewer before answering it?
Oh, absolutely. If that helps you comprehend the question and helps answer the question, absolutely. It is not a bad thing to do. And that way you are ensuring you're answering the proper question versus what they asked and what you think that they asked.
Great. Great. Thank you. Please continue.
Sure. Great questions, by the way, from the audience. Let's see here. There is a fine line between cocky and confident. Be mindful of this. This is, of course, your time to shine. An interview is really there for you to relay what you've done and, almost brag without sounding like you're bragging about yourself. Again, we want to get to know who you are. And if you come across as being overly confident or kind of full of yourself, we're going to think, well, gee, is that something that our patients are going to get a hold of? Are they going to be easy to train? It just puts other thoughts in the interviewer's mind when maybe that's not what the intention is, and you're just trying to give a good example of an accomplishment. The thing is, you can be proud of what your skills are or your accomplishments, but you want to be humble and give credit where credit is due. If it was teamwork that helped you obtain that accomplishment, make sure you mention that. You don't want it to sound like me, 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 especially in healthcare. Everywhere that you are in a hospital requires teamwork, and it requires some type of collaboration. So we want to make sure that you are, properly relaying that, and you're not coming off as that cocky type of mean person who may not take the value of those team members as we would want you to as interviewers.
So Lisa asked,
go ahead.
do you prefer a potential employee to answer questions and boast about themselves, or is it better to only show examples of when you are really being a team player? Or how do you find an easy mix of both?
That's a great question. You may be asked, what is your most proud accomplishment? That's obviously based on you. However, there may be, again, a project where you worked on a team and that you're excited to share, and you're genuinely proud of it. It doesn't always have to be in a team setting. However, it could, again, be kind of related to it directly or indirectly. Again, it kind of depends on the question that the interviewer is asking. But again, it's okay to talk about yourself. You just don't want to sound full of yourself.
Right. Great. Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead and finish your last couple points there.
Okay, so practice. Of course, just like handshaking and eye contact, practicing makes perfect. And I hate to say perfect, but it definitely makes you more comfortable. I know, Dee, you said there was a link here that would provide you with some tools to help you practice at home with interviewing skills. Interviewing is never easy, I'll tell you that. No matter how many times you've done it, there's always a part of nervousness through it. Even if you're, a great if you're great at answering certain questions and you know how to be prepared, but the biggest thing is just practice. And you don't want to sound like you're rehearsed either. We don't want to get to know you as the robot. We want to get to know you as the person. So practicing will help you feel more comfortable along the way. And then at the end, just clarify the next steps. What can you expect next? Is there going to be another part of the interview process? Will you be coming back to meet with anyone? How are the final candidates chosen? When will they be chosen? Those are all great questions. Sometimes it's even okay to ask for the interviewer's card. In my next slide here, we'll talk a little bit about why that's important, but we want to just make sure you're clarifying. It's okay to, again, spit back information.
What's the typical time frame between someone interviewing and notification of hiring? I know it varies, but does it vary greatly for like tech type kind of staff versus nurses versus someone who works in the kitchen or housekeeping?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends by position, and it depends on the severity of the position in terms of fill status. So, that's why it's good to ask those questions of when can they expect to hear back. So it really varies. Sometimes we make an offer within a matter of 2 or 3 days, and sometimes, unfortunately, it does take those 2 or 3 grueling weeks where you're waiting to hear back. It just depends on what the need is and how great that need is.
Do you ever make an offer on the spot?
Typically we don't, because we do normally have more than one interview scheduled, but we have done it on the same day.
All right, great. Before we go on to the next slide, I want to pull out our last poll question. So after an interview, what do you in the audience do? I got this one before we talked. Well, it looks like a lot of the audience sends an email thank you an email thank you, so that's a good thing.
That is great.
We're going to give you just a couple seconds left to answer the question. And then we're going to hide it so that we can get on to our last couple of slides. All right, we're going to close the poll now. So let's hear what Urvita has to say about this.
Yes, don't forget to follow up. A small gesture goes a long way. I always say, even if you find that it wasn't the best fit for you after speaking to the interviewer, and maybe you found something else, you still want to send a thank you note, whether it's via email or through snail mail, if you will, to all parties, and put a personal touch on it. Make sure you personalize it a little bit. If you guys talked about the interviewer going to a White Sox game or traveling, you want to make sure that you put something to make you to make you memorable, really, and it makes the interviewer feel like, oh, you were listening, when I was talking. So a little gesture like that does go a long way. Do not repeatedly contact the hiring manager or recruiter to check on your pending status. I will tell you, I get people who call me at least 3 to 4 times a week. If I say that I'm going to follow up with you, I will follow up with you. And that's why it's important, as previously mentioned, to clarify the next steps. So if the recruiter says you'll hear from me in the next 2 weeks, give them those 2 weeks to respond. You don't want to come across as annoying even. You want to come across as you're interested, of course, but you don't want to come across as that person who keeps calling and calling. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have had candidates who just won't stop kind of communicating with us, that we've had to think otherwise. They may have been the strongest candidate, and then that changes after a week or two because of their eagerness, or over-eagerness, I should say. So my recommendation, again, is always clarify when you can hear back from them, and if you don't hear back from them, you can follow up after that point. But give yourself 2 weeks or so. The hiring process, unfortunately, does take a long time sometimes. So, just don't keep calling or emailing.
Yeah. So, so based on what you just said, if somebody does not give you a time frame, it sounds like 2 weeks would be other than the thank you, but 2 weeks would be an appropriate. Hi, have you made a decision on the position yet?
Correct. I
There's
think
a lot of. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that's a pretty comfortable time to just check in and say, just wanted to follow up, haven't heard from you, has the position been filled, or, am I still under consideration?
Right. There's a lot of companies that just don't have the manpower to send out thanks but no thanks kind of letters. So there's a lot of people that are hanging on and on and on that don't know one way or the other. So knowing what is an appropriate time to follow up really is a good thing to know.
Oh, definitely. And it's okay to know if you were not considered. At least it gives you some kind of closure. So I would always recommend doing some type of follow-up if you don't hear something.
Exactly. Great. Well, I would love to thank Urvita Patel from Presence Health for joining us today and giving us these valuable tips on our interview process. It was wonderful, and thank you very, very, very much for helping all of our job seekers in Illinois. You will have an opportunity to listen to this webinar on our YouTube channel and on Illinois WorkNet. And if you have any questions, please contact us at info@illinoisworknet.com. Thanks, Urvita, for joining us today.